Warning. What you are about to watch is not a professional. Just a guy with some tools and a willingness to cut things apart and put it back together. Well, here's the next big project I got going. This is my parts car. It's a 91 Geo Metro 3-cylinder 5-speed. This is the one that I yanked motor and tranny out of to put in my daily driver. And now I'm going to go through and fix this car up. I've already done quite a bit of work on it. So, a little backstory, this car's been sitting since 1995. 25 years it's been sitting outside. And it got into a fender bender wreck. It got taken to a buddy of mine's shop. He was supposed to do all the repairs on it. He had already started by removing all of the crunch sheet metal. It was hit on this corner. He did replace the knee assembly, and then he drilled off all the sheet metal, cut all the spot welds out, pulled everything out that was crunched. This frame rail was laid over about 2 inches. It was pushed over about 2 inches, and it was pushed up about 2.5 inches. And I've gone through and just with a pair of hammers, chain, bar, high lift, super basic tools, redneck body work, and I've gone through and I was able to pull the firewall out by hooking the high lift to the front bumper mount, and then back here, and I hooked into the strut plate, which I actually just removed because I knew I was going to bend it up doing this, and I was able to use the high lift and pull the firewall out. I do still have a small crease right here, which I'll get to, and then I went through with the high lift and pushed this frame rail back over in place. I was able to get enough pressure on it down to get it back. It's within 1/8 of an inch, which I think is tighter tolerances than Geo used manufacturing these things. These are built pretty loose. But this car, when I bought it, it did come with another complete front clip out of a junkyard, and I've already gone through and cut off all the good sheet metal that I was intending on using. It's sitting right there, and in the process of fitting it up, like I said, this car sat outside for 25 years, partially disassembled. There was no front clip on it. There was just a mud flap sitting over the engine and the transmission. Well, because the guy that had started taking the car apart was already drilling all the spot welds and everything, you can see where there's surface rust. He had cleaned up the body glue that lays in that seam right there. You can see that's full of body glue. So that was exposed metal, and the car was sitting underneath the cedar tree for many years, and this was all full of tree goop. So it started rusting out the pinch weld right here, where the upper cowl comes down onto the top seam for the firewall, which is also the bottom seam for the firewall, which is also the mount for the strut tower, and that mounts over here to this fender structure. So that was starting to rot out. There's a little bit of rot right here, and if you look inside, it's a little bit on the edge there, a little bit here, a little bit here. These cars are already built out of extremely thin sheet metal. It's like 20 gauge or thinner, maybe even. So plus, even though I straightened it out, you can see where I had to work the kink out right there because this was kinked down. I got it all straight, but I don't like the look of that rot. So you can see my permanent marker line. That's representing what I'm going to be cutting out of this whole corner of the car. So the cowl piece, this fender structure, and it's going to be a piece of the firewall. I do have to be careful because the ECM is right about there on the inside. I'm going to have to go through and cut those pieces off of this front clip, which this is all still solid metal. It's in good shape. There's rot up here, but no big deal because I'm going to be cutting it right in here. This pinch weld's still in good shape, even though, you know, obviously it's separated from me drilling out the spot welds, but it's all good quality metal, whereas that over there is all rotten. So this can all get pinched back together after it's welded in place onto this car, and then put the new front clip on. Well, there she is, all cut out. I did leave this brace in place, just drilled the spot welds off. That'll give me a nice tie point. Cut right just past the bend in that piece there, And I do believe I made the right decision cutting this all out. What was left in there, the body glue had obviously gotten moisture behind it, was all peeling out, falling apart. The sheet metal is just, I mean, it's like razor blades. It's almost nothing left. Hardly had to drill out the spot welds, they popped right through. There's what's left of the pinch weld. Just, yeah, she was gone. Now, this wasn't terribly bad. Like, I cut out quite a bit of good material. You can also see this square kink right here. That was where the foot of my high lift was sitting when I was pushing on the frame rail. But so got rid of all that down on the bottom. You can see it was getting water in there. It was compromised. So now I got to get all of this cleaned up, get the body glue out of the joints, get all of this cleaned up here, and then cut out the patch panel to put it in. The reason I'm not going to be able to get most of this little crease out right here, there's a crease that runs right there. You see that piece of metal right there. These cars have a firewall reinforcement. That's right on the edge of this plate on the inside. So this plate's kinked just a little bit in. It's not going to be enough to matter. When I go to weld that corner in place, I will probably have a small gap right in here to fill. And this is spot weld only as it is. So I'll be able to take the flange that sits here and bend it down to get my welds back in place. All right, got all my pieces cut. There's the firewall top piece and transition corner coming around. Got the inner cowl panel that drops inside right there, and of course got the outer I don't even know what you call it, the piece that mounts strut plate, strut tower, whatever you want to call it. Gotta get all this cleaned up, get all the surface rust off of it, get all the body glue cleaned up, start getting them tacked in. Well, in the process of fitting up my pieces to lay in there, I've discovered I simply have to get this crease out of the firewall. Wouldn't be a big deal for mounting up the inner fender structure, but for getting alignment across this piece, this bow's got to come out. It's got a crease going right here. I can get the contour of it. This is supposed to be dead flat. It's got a little hump here for an inside mount for the computer, no big deal. So that plate is caved over and it pulled the firewall with it. If I weld anything out in here in the crease, more than likely it's just going to tear the sheet metal. But if I can get connected to that brace on the backside, I should be able to slide hammer this out by welding something on and just attach the slide hammer. But worst case scenario, I'll probably have to cut the firewall, bow that back out, and then beat the firewall back out to match it, weld them back together. That'll create my nice flat edge here to put these pieces on. Or I could get really creative with the high lift and a board and push about 3/4 of it out at once. Redneck engineering, eh? Well, that's a hell of a lot better than it was. I do still have a little bit of the crease right here, but now it's no longer in a surface that's going to matter. I just put tension on it, and basically when this caved in here, it pushed this out. So as soon as I put tension on the plate, push the plate out, I pushed it a little bit further than it needed to be, and I came back in here and beat this back in. And what that's done is it's created tension over here to hold it in place. So when I let the jack off, this is going to pull in just a little bit and then it'll stop. And then I can go ahead and hammer form this edge as straight as it needs to be, because the plate back here doesn't matter as long as this front edge is flat, which is really easy for me to eyeball, because where this raised mount is and where the raised section of the firewall is, those have to be in line with each other, which they're already real close. That's not bad for redneck body work. Now, it ain't gonna be pretty, but there's the first piece all welded back in place. and I'd say it's a lot better than what was in there. This is just paper thin. So I gotta get all the spot welds cleaned up and get ready for, I don't know, 3/4 of a core support to go on. Now, like I said before, anybody can do this type of work. It's not that difficult. So I'm just getting as many holes lined up as I can. Obviously, so this is a plate that I already replaced, and now I'm putting more factory sheet metal under it. These two were out of the same car, so if I did all of my fitment on this piece correctly, all of the original spot weld holes should line up, and I've got them lined up pretty darn good. The fit up is not going to be perfect because I know this frame rail is twisted, and I do believe this outside sheet metal is twisted because the outside of the core support does not want to line up. I'll have to rework this side. And you can see how much fitting up that has to be done in there. So in reality, on a front wheel drive vehicle, the proximity of this strut tower to that one is the only truly critical measurement, because the suspension all pivots off of that point. That's going to change alignment big time. So I'm really focusing on getting everything on the firewall lined up as close as I possibly can. And then the rest of this is just going to have to get walked in a little bit at a time. And I'm pretty sure that this parts car was wrecked because, and also I'm sure that they do not use the spot welder at the same exact location of every single spot weld when they're building these cars at the factory, because there's a lot of them down here on the bottom edge that don't line up, so they must be welded different at the factory. But this car I know was at least in a minor fender bender, and then obviously the wrecked one I'm fixing. You can see there's minor alignment issues, and a lot of this, like I said, I'm going to start at the firewall, get everything locked in up top on the sides, down the wheel well, and then I'm going to have to carefully fold it, peen it, hammer it, pinch it, whatever I got to do, all the way down the frame rail, and then repeat that on the inside. And then I can work with that little corner over there. That alignment can't be that bad. I do have the fender here, so I'll get it as close as I possibly can and dry fit the fender to make sure it's going to line up, and that I can get the top of the cross, English is hard, top of the core support welded in place. Now, I will definitely admit that this is very tedious and time consuming. But what does help you out is there are certain holes that the factory puts in place. There's several of them here, and this one over here that I got to punch in, that are intended for when they're putting the cars together to line up. So I'm just taking a taper punch and lining up all of those holes, and then having to, you know, wiggle the panel into place. Now, because this is a fender off of an unknown car and this is a wrecked car, I'm just not expecting a perfect fit up. Like, this whole flange right here had to be pushed back in maybe a 1/2 inch, and I have to lift up on this little bit here, and it's just it's tedious, but this is not hard. Like, this can be done by anybody with a welder. Though I would definitely recommend that you have a body hammer. Having a point where you can actually manipulate the metal, man, that's a night and day difference. Don't you know, pry bar is absolutely an essential tool. Of course, your rubber mallet, many sets of vice grips, pinning everything in place. But get a proper hammer for this one. Well, got all the bottom pinch weld down here all fitted up all the way up onto the frame rail. Coming up on the frame horn, you can see I've got a pretty decent gap right here. Now, it's very difficult to tell on the camera, but if I pan down this frame rail, you can tell that you can't see this inside edge of the frame. Oh, right there, you can actually see it. The frame rail is bowed over pretty much from about there to there. And I've got, you know, the parts car front clip here. And you can see, if I'm looking straight down on it, you can actually see the inside wall. So this frame rail on that car is laid over. So the best thing I'm going to be able to do, I could just beat it over with a hammer, but it's just going to bend the crap out of it. So I need to be able to pull on it. So I'm going to utilize where the transmission mount was here. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and then a battery bolt box here. battery box bolt there. I'm gonna build a bracket, probably two of them. One that will use these 3 bolts and another one that will use these 4 bolts. And I should be able to put a jack underneath the truck and pick up on a, build a plate that sits there and a bar that comes out, be able to pick up on it and roll that frame rail back into place so I can get all these top welds back in. It's going to be one of those situations where you build a tool for one use, you will never use it again, but well worth it when you build it. Now, it does not need to be pretty whatsoever, because we can just come over here, get a whole bunch of leverage on it. Let's watch that gap close right up. A little bit of working, we'll get that right into shape. Starting to get a pretty good fit up. And when you have no idea what you're doing, there's definitely no rules about what you have to use to pinch everything back together. Now that frame rail top side's all welded up. Got all my bolts I was using to pinch everything back out of there. And interestingly enough, you would never imagine this would friggin' work if you don't know what you're doing. And I don't know what I'm doing. The closer I get this frame rail back into straight, the closer this edge of the core support wants to line up. This was sitting back like 2.5 inches earlier. I don't know what I'm doing, but it's working.
It's working! It's working!
Now I'm on to working. You can see on this side where this bend is, that's where the top edge of this fender is rolled out. So once again, quick little bracket, find a couple bolt holes, big old flat washer, and I'm gonna go to something nice and secure, frame horn over there, and I'm gonna pull this back in, get this core support lined up. So there you can see, chain it to binder, quick little tab, couple bolt holes, come in with a body hammer, and just start beating on stuff. You can see, well, now you can't because I have it straight, but you can see where it had a high spot. Tap it down and in. If it starts forming a bubble like I had back in this corner, come back in with the tip of the hammer, work that back in. Now I've got this edge of the fender fairly straight. I've got the top of the core support lined up, but now I can tell that this frame horn is bent, and there's not a whole lot I can do to get it back over this way. It's same as the other side. The whole frame rail's twisted over, and I really don't have a good purchase on it. So it's gonna be some hammer work, and I'm gonna have to deal with some body dents that the bumper is gonna hide to push that thing back over. Now, like I said, I don't know what I'm doing, but if I'm looking down here, you can see I've got a spot weld here, and the paint is cracked around it. That's an indicator that these two pieces of sheet metal are no longer lined up the way they were when the paint was applied. So I know I've got a little bit of distortion here. You can see there's a little bit back here. And another giveaway is, you can see right there is a spot weld. Now it's very difficult to see on camera, but you can see it's humped up. That's an indicator there's a bend right here. Now I can push this down while pulling this piece that's bent. It's currently bent out. If I'm pushing in on it while I tap that down, it's going to relieve the stress in that material and allow it to come back into its natural form. And it's a lot of just fiddling around with the body hammer. Little tips, little taps here and there, and you slowly work it until it gets as close as will work for what you're doing. Now I have this fully welded factory corner, the core support, the fascia, the inner fender. This is all factory components right here. So I've got something solid to measure off of. And I'm within a 1/16 of an inch. Somehow it doesn't make sense because this corner is still opened up, but we're lined up here on the core support. We're lined up fore and aft, and I've worked this inner fender structure as much as I dare to. This corner right here just needs to go, I mean, it's like this much of it that needs to go. But I think I'll be able to cover that up with the sheet metal. And there's the core support and inner fender, all structure, all put back in, all welded up. I'll have to go through and obviously clean up all the welds. They'll get sprayed down with some OSFO, and then a self-hatching primer on top of that, and then a coat of white. Now I'm back over on this corner, patching the firewall and the upper cowl back in, which my fitment was okay on this side. I left myself way too much of a gap in the middle. With MIG, this is going to be quite a bit of a pain to get that filled up. That's where flux core really shines for body work. It's ugly, but you can stick the wire way out and you can get the temperature of the weld way down and you can fill those gaps, no problem. With MIG, this is meep, meep, meep. Wait for it to cool down between every little spot weld, fill it all the way up, all the way around, come back through and grind it all off and then clean it up. And then I got the center structure piece. It goes on right here. That'll have to get it all cleaned up and welded in. And the actual repair itself will be done. Obviously, like I said, then OSFO and self-etching primer on the rest of it. And then I will take this car home and start reassembling all the sheet metal on it. And come down right to the last piece. I'll have to clamp this along as I go, but I got my top edge lined up. It sits just a touch low, but this piece is just structural support. I'll have to do a little bit of hammer work on this flange back here, but we'll butt that right up. And then lots of cleanup grinding for that piece up there. And everything, like I said, it'll get the OSFO treatment, then it'll get self-etching primer, and like this valley here and along the sides of the frame rail, that'll all get a smear of body glue. And I will call that a win. It is ready for some sheet metal after cleanup, obviously. And if you're worried about, you know, that big old ugly spot that had to chop out of the firewall, I wouldn't worry about that little guy. Because once the cowl, the hood, and the fender are on, you will never see it. That will only be visible if you have the hood open. And being that this is my personal car, it's actually my spare car, and I'm the only person that ever works on my car, and I don't ever intend on selling this, no one's ever even gonna see that except for me. And if I wanted to be fancy, grind it down, little Bondo, slap some paint, it could be easily hidden. So there you go. Mouth-breathing retard like myself. Very minimal tools. Hammer and a dolly, some pinch weld vice grips from Harbor Freight. Dolly set was from Harbor Freight too. Chain and a binder and a high lift jack. From a totaled car to, I will be able to put this back together and put it back on the road. It's really not that hard to do. Like I said, I've never done any major structural body work like this before. I had a parts car front clip and I had a wrecked car. I know how to weld. You can put the rest of it together. None of this is that hard, guys. Get out in the driveway, mess around with some stuff, figure something out, learn something new. Thanks for watching. Have a good one.